5 or 6 contributors, man, you're in the like top 1 percentile. Like the top percentile. You're doing great.
I've been
Like,
very happy with our small group.
Yeah.
Of ragtag misfits.
right. So like don't feel bad. Don't feel bad, right?
Well, that's where I was going. LTSP is one of the top projects in the open source community.
Absolutely.
They're running at about 6
Yeah.
contributors.
That's right. But that said, I mean, like, do you want more? Yes. Like, maybe not. I mean, maybe you're working in a well-defined space and you're doing what you have. I want more. I always want more.
Yeah.
People on my projects.
But at least it's more than me, right?
Yeah. I mean,
It's just more than the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it was just me, it wouldn't even be me right now.
right. Yeah.
Wouldn't, I never realized you're talking public domain, but wouldn't the enterprise be very interested in the difference between the two? Because their rate of software failure is horrendous.
So the answer is yes. I actually teach at a business school at MIT. So I teach some of this material and some ideas about how to sort of like mobilize like volunteer contributors in the kinds of businesses. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. So here's a little model of wiki success. It's a make-believe model of wiki success. I think that we'll get more contributors. The contributors will be some sort of function of interest in the topic. Uninteresting topics are going to have less people. More interesting topics will have more people. Whether or not you use barn stars, if you have barn stars, it'll be better. And whether or not you have Jimbo, right? Here's just a theory here. But the problem, of course, is that in order to test a theory like this, we need variation in contributors. If we only have one measure of contributors, then we can't. What we've done is we've selected on our dependent variable. That by only looking at the successful cases, we can't tell which of these things are important, right? We have no variation to speak of. So what I suggest, and what I'll be spending the second half of my talk doing, is arguing for sort of the systematic, is for addressing this issue, for exploring answers to the why of peer production. And what I want to argue is the way that we should do that is through systematic study of peer production failures in a way that can helpfully build towards an understanding of peer production success, right? We'll put that in a second. And I want to argue that this is sort of the next frontier, both in terms of research, but also a useful thing that, in some ways, academics are much less well-suited to do this than practitioners and communities who actually are like working in this space. And so it's something that I want to encourage you to get involved in. So what I'm going to do for the way I'm going to do the rest of this is I'm going to sort of try to send you 3 sort of postcards. These are 3 sort of research postcards from research that is trying to look at and examples of work that is trying to sort of systematically study failure. And I'm going to focus on my own work because that's what I do on a daily basis, although I will give one example from software which looks at someone else's. And these aren't, I'm not trying to give you like a complete picture of these, but I'm trying to give you a summary of a set of, trying to give you a flavor of what looking at these kinds of failures can look like and what it can bring. So the first study is a paper which I've just finished called Almost Wikipedia. There's a version of a talk up there as well. If people want to have a paper, I'm happy to share. If you want to subject yourself to academic papers, I recommend the talk. The paper's called Almost Wikipedia, and it's really asking this question, right? This idea that if we want to understand how Wikipedia works, what we need to do is look at all the failed Wikipedias. Now, the good news is that, well, I don't know, good news. I mean, it's not. There were lots of failed Wikipedias. There were a whole bunch of attempts to create online, collaborative, freely licensed encyclopedia projects founded before Wikipedia. Everything 2 is the local favorite. Also, I contributed to Everything 2 for a while as well.
This is Slashdot, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Everything 2 is one example. It's interesting that Everything 2 still exists, although it's become much less focused on encyclopedic content over time, in part because of Wikipedia. They've sort of established their marginal utility in the world of Wikipedia. But there was a whole bunch of these different projects which basically had a very similar idea to Wikipedia and were trying to do something very similar to Wikipedia, but were doing it ahead of time. Richard Stallman, wrote, founded the GNU project and the Free Software Foundation, so his most famous manifesto is the GNU Manifesto. He's written a bunch of other manifestos, including a manifesto calling for a free encyclopedia, written in '99, which encouraged a whole bunch of people, including the founders of Wikipedia, to go out and create a encyclopedia modeled off the process of the process of free software development. Now, there were a whole bunch of these different projects. The Info Network was a project founded by Aaron Swartz, who's been in the news this year. Unfortunately, H2G2 was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Earth Edition, sort of founded by Douglas Adams, announced on the BBC, built a community, still exists in some form today. There's a whole bunch of these other ones. I'm actually missing one or two as well. The Shared Encyclopedia project was a project where you would like create an encyclopedia on you'd like make pages on your own web page, and then someone would maintain an index, and so you could have multiple pages on different topics. GNU was called GNUpedia when it launched. It was GNU's changed to GNU's Not an Encyclopedia project. You know how that goes, right? So what I did in this project was to try to understand how Wikipedia succeeded by going and looking at all the failures. What I did was I tracked down all the people who had created all these projects, and a couple that are up on here, and interviewed them and talked to them, and then built us, used that and dug up a bunch of sort of more archival data and tried to build a set of sort of propositions, hypotheses, if you will, about why Wikipedia worked with these other projects fell flat. And what I came up with was 4 sort of results, and I'll walk through the first sort of one in detail. But the basic, but the 4 sort of principles were that first, Wikipedia attracted a community because it was built around a familiar product, and I'll talk about what I mean by that as well. But the second was that Wikipedia attracted contributors because it was focused on substantive content development instead of technology development. All the other projects were very technologically focused. Wikipedia was not. The third hypothesis was that, our proposition was that Wikipedia attracted contributors because it offered very low transaction costs associated with participation. This is that it was certain you could do a drive-by edit on Wikipedia in a way that you couldn't do the others. And the fourth idea was that Wikipedia attracted contributors because it de-emphasized attribution and social ownership. And as I suggested, there's a paper with much more detail, and it goes into more detail. I'm just trying to give you the idea here. But I want to focus in on this first one here about the familiar products. I think that's kind of unclear, and also it was a very strong result in here. A lot of the failed attempts tried to expand on an encyclopedic frame. So Everything 2 was, I don't know, did anyone here use Everything 2? Anyone else see that? So Everything 2 was supposed to not just be an encyclopedia. It was like an encyclopedia, but it was for everything, right? And it sort of just defied description in some ways, right? So if you went to the Everything 2 webpage, you say, what is Everything 2? And you look at the Everything 2 entry on Everything 2. It would say a flexible web database, which seeks to find the best way to store and link ideas. The result is absolutely crazy, right? They really resisted the idea of calling themselves an encyclopedia. The Info Network, another project, said, the founder said, I don't think I thought, let's just put an encyclopedia online. I think I probably thought, like, this is going to be an exploration. We're going to figure out what a reference work online looks like, right? And I got this kind of statement from a lot of these different people. A lot of these people who created these projects, is that when they started out, they were really interested in sort of exploring what a project like theirs could do. And as a result, they resisted, for example, calling it an encyclopedia, or because that was sort of uninteresting. But this led to a whole bunch of problems. The fact that they were sort of hard to pin down. And it led to problems with mobilization, with building this community. So here's a quote from one of the projects, H2G2, which is, as I mentioned, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Earth Edition, right? So H2G2 was supposed to be an encyclopedia written about Earth, but written in the style of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? So it's supposed to be a little irreverent, maybe a little funny. It's supposed to be, a little goofy, not so tied down like a normal encyclopedia. But the fact that they deviated, but it was just supposed to be an encyclopedia. But the fact that they were just a different encyclopedia, like, totally confused people as to how to contribute and made it very difficult for them to make good contributions. So one founder of H2G2 said, so one of the problems was people would be writing completely fictional stuff about the universe, about the Hitchhiker's universe. And we'd go, no, you're not getting it. This is for real people. This is about the real world. Then what they did, at the same time, that they try to do stuff about the real world, but try to write it from the point of view of an intergalactic guide. So we'd get articles about soccer that would start with, on planet Earth, which is the 3rd planet out from the solar system Sol, the humans like to play blah, 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 blah. Shut up, all right? It's like, this is going to be read by humans who live on Earth. We had piles and piles of that shit, and we had to shovel our way out from under it, right? By diverging just a little bit from this sort of traditional concept encyclopedia, people didn't know how to contribute. And as a result, when they tried to contribute, their work was rejected, they maybe felt bad, or they had to go through this process of training to sort of get themselves up to speed. But as I suggested, Wikipedia, and Wikipedia was, among all these projects, really sort of unique in its, not unique, but it was extreme in the degree to which it said, if you've ever picked up Britannica, right? If you've ever picked up an encyclopedia, you know exactly what it is that we're trying to build. So here's a way of thinking about summarizing these sort of results. So we can think on two dimensions, right? On one dimension, we have sort of innovation in terms of the product or the goal, right? How familiar is the product or the goal? And on the other dimension, this is summarizing those four propositions. We have a set of things around like low transaction costs or sort of social forms of ownership around sort of how we're going to go about and building, right? So projects down here are projects which are saying, we're going to do the old thing in the old way. We're going to build Britannica, and we're going to build it using this traditional authorships models, a lot of the traditional technologies. We're just going to build Britannica online. We're just not going to pay you for your contributions, and we're going to give it away, which is nice, right? These projects completely failed. They had almost no one. Up in this corner, we have projects which are saying, we're going to find out what an encyclopedia online looks like, and we're going to do it using these crazy new methods, these crazy new tools, right? These projects also really struggled to attract anybody. People didn't know where to start. They didn't have a place to wrap their head around. The only projects that built significant communities at all were projects along this diagonal. Either projects that said, we're going to build a new thing, but in the old way, or projects that said, we're going to build the old thing, but we're going to build it in this new way. We're going to take advantage of the technology of the internet, right? And Wikipedia was the only project among these that really set out to say, we're building Britannica, but we're going to do it in this crazy new wiki way. So Wikipedia has, as I've already alluded to, tens of thousands of pages of rules. But here's a secret. You don't actually need to read any of them to be a good contributor to Wikipedia. In fact, you can probably even win arguments in Wikipedia with people who are like serious Wikipedians by just saying encyclopedic. Like, I think this is properly encyclopedic, right? Notability. What is notable, right? Well, basically, it's the kind of things that are written in encyclopedias, right? What is, articles in Wikipedia should be written from a neutral point of view. What is neutral point of view? Well, it basically means the kind of way that Encyclopedia Dramatica is written, right? The idea, and I think that if you think about big successful free software projects, the ones that have mobilized thousands of contributors, right? The ones, those projects very often fall into this in this space right here. GNU, right? The mother of all free software projects. GNU's not Unix. It's a joke, right? Because GNU is Unix. GNU is exactly Unix, right? And if it's early days of Unix, or if it's the early days of GNU, if you can just look at the Unix manual, find out which command is missing, and implement that command, and you are making a good contribution to GNU early on, right? And that especially in the early days, this really bootstraps it, right? Other big projects, right? Like I don't know, like OpenOffice is a bit like Office, right? Like, I mean, like, there's a lot of these standard documents that have big standards, standards documents. People know exactly what it is that they're trying to build towards, right? Now, we can be very innovative about how we build it. And a lot of the most successful projects are. Because if you're totally uninnovative about what you're doing, then you're just doing the old thing, you're just not paying people. But the most successful projects, at least in this space, were ones that occupied that point up there. And that was something that people said over and over, which I was not expecting going in. There was a question, two questions, yeah.
I think one of the differences might be that Wikipedia, GNU, the other ones, if you submit it to the project, they didn't say, well, there's a bug here or there's a bug there. They'll say, hey, we have somebody that'll correct the bug that we found in your program. Wikipedia would take yours and have somebody else modify it or correct it.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be perfect when you posted it.
But all three of these projects did that same thing. Not all projects did that, but but half of the projects had, half of these early projects had direct editing in text. They had little forms of authorship, like sort of like clear ownership in that way. Everything too was an example where people owned their little piece, and people could edit them, but like it was not common. Is not common, right? Do you have a question? No. Okay. All right. Postcard 2. Oh gosh, this is So Postcard 2 is from a book called, is a book which is actually a study of SourceForge. They look at SourceForge projects and they do exactly what I said I wish people would do. And I was actually saying this before they did it, so I was very happy when they did it. Because I was off studying wikis and other projects. I'd been doing free software for too long. I needed to explore some other phases as well. But this is a book that was published recently by MIT Press. And it's doing exactly what I'm talking about here. The book is called Internet Success, which always makes me think of Success Baby every time I think of it. But again, this is just sort of a quick postcard here. This is not my research. I was not involved in this in any way. But what they did was they looked at the success and they looked at success in SourceForge projects at two different levels. They looked at what things were associated with like basically keeping projects from being abandoned early on. So they have two stages, and then once a project sort of makes it through that first stage where they're not just completely abandoned, what sort of things are associated with sort of sustained development and large community building in the way that I've sort of alluded to. Because on my own work, I'll just kind of briefly go through some of their findings. One thing that they find is that at these two different periods, initiation and mature periods, they test a whole bunch of different hypotheses. One thing they found, which is kind of interesting, is that license choice does not seem to matter. There's no association. This has been actually shown in a bunch of places that projects mobilize contributors in ways that seem to be irrespective of the licenses. There's no statistical relationship between license choice and outcome here. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you found any links to, specifically with the wiki side, with Creative Commons licensing?
Yeah, so all the wikis that I've looked at, I have this data set of 80,000 wikis, but all the wikis that I've looked at have been, so if you include it, all of them have been Creative Commons attribution share alike, the same license. And if you look at Wikipedia, it's under GFDL and then sort of switched to the same license. So I don't have variation of licenses in wikis. All my wikis are free. And part of that is because I'm interested in the production of these commons. I'm interested in this pure production happens for the most part out in these spaces. So it could be copyleft, it could be non-copyleft, but it's sort of in this sort of free commons sort of space. And so I don't have a lot of variation. Wikis, like there's really one license that everyone uses. And it's a copyleft license, and it's just the one that everyone uses. Yeah.
And what's successful and what is not, is there a bias toward the first? Or about popularity or press mention, anything like that?
So you look back in these ones, look back in these projects, right? Like part of the idea here is that all of these projects were first, right? So clearly that wasn't enough to seal the deal, right? There was one project, the Interpedia, which was founded before the web. So, all right, I'm beginning to buy that. That may have been a challenge, right? But almost all these projects were active at the time that Wikipedia released and had a bit of a head start. So, I mean, it could be. Although, I mean, Wikipedia wasn't even clearly bigger than these other projects and bigger than Everything 2 and H2G2 for more than a year. So the dynamics, the way these things play out, can sometimes be more complicated. And I think that's not a. Does it contribute something? Yes, probably. That's one of the things we can look at, but it's not a complete story in a lot of these spaces. All right. Internet success. Programming languages also don't seem to be a big factor. This is among programming languages for which there's some big enough here. These are the things that everyone argues about, right? Like if we choose this language, no one will contribute. Turns out, no correlation between programming languages selected and the number of contributors to projects, at least in Source. What? Except Haskell, that's right. Because it's great, right? Lots of users. Leadership does seem to matter a lot. And leadership behavior is something which is kind of kind of interesting. Like their best predictor of whether or not a project will succeed actually looks a lot in SourceForge looks a lot like my sort of theory of familiarity. The single best predictor anyone has come up for whether or not a project, or well, I don't know anyone, these guys came up with for whether or not a project will succeed is the number of categories that the project has been placed into. Right? Not the specific contents of the categories, just the well-defined projects where we know what it is and how it's going to be done in this whole sort of space. Those projects, where, which can be taken as a proxy for leadership, can be taken as a proxy for sort of a clear goal. This is one of the spaces where you seem to see a clear sort of association in terms of further mobilization. And there's lots more. I totally recommend the book. The book is superb. All right, third postcard. This is yet a different community. This is a study that I've done with colleague Andres Monroy Hernandez, who's very ironically now at Microsoft Research. Actually, this has been published, and you can get this on my website. Grab it there. And this is and we're looking in the context of a remix community called Scratch. Does anyone here use Scratch? Or the kid who uses Scratch? So Scratch is a piece of free software, which is really, really awesome. It's a programming language, which is sort of graphical and designed for kids, but it's useful for anyone. And it's implemented in Squeak, which is implemented in Smalltalk. It's very object-oriented. And the way that it works is that it's designed to make sort of animations and interactive games of various kinds. And the way that it works is that you take these code blocks right here, and you drag them into here, and they'll sort of snap together to make programs or functions. And those functions are associated with sprites, which are really just objects. And those objects can have attributes like costumes, so that you can animate things like this. And what's really cool about it is that the blocks will snap together, or they won't, right? So you actually can't write a syntactically incorrect Scratch program. I mean, your program can still not do what you want, and almost certainly won't until you debug it. But you will never have a syntax error, right? So it's really cool. It's a great way. If you have kids, I totally recommend that you do it. The sort of median Scratch user is 12 or 13 years old, but there are users as young as 6 or 7 that are uploading tons and tons of projects, right? And crazy complicated stuff, animated platform games. Someone built a really nice Breakout clone, and I was like, but there's no sine. How did you do it without like sine and cosine? But they can pull it off, right? But Scratch is also and where this really comes in is this idea of sort of collaboration. What I'm interested in is, of course, pure production. Is that Scratch has the ability? There's a share button up there, right? And you can click share, and you can share it on the Scratch online community. And a lot of users have done that. Scratch online community contains now more than a million users have shared more than 2 million projects. So it's an enormous community, mostly kids, but plenty of adults as well, who share tons of these projects. Every project shared on Scratch is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike. Every project on Scratch is remixable. Any user can come and download any other project, and they can change it. You don't have to share your projects, but if you want people to remix your project, that's what you do. You can also comment and interact with them as well. So it's a platform for remixing, right? Here's what a remix looks like. Here's a project that's actually really cool. It's called a game called Neo. It's sort of like a side-scrolling spaceship game. So you like shoot like little bullets out. Other ones, this is kind of hand-drawn. This was shared by Nim Kuri, and it's released under the Creative Commons license. Here's a remix of the game. You can see I'm in election cycle off, but this is a version of the game called Star Wars Republican Gunship, where you navigate John McCain / Star Wars like rebel ships to shoot like Barack Obama's and Hillary Clinton's, I think. I love that there's a description of the project by the user who is 9, who said like if you're American, you'll understand this game. I'm a Democrat, so like don't be mad at me. I'm like, you're 9 years old. What do you mean you're a Democrat? But it's a cute example. But that's a superficial one. People do much more. People build companies in this. They call them companies, where they will have like people that are artists, people that are coders of various kinds, and they'll build incredibly complicated stuff. And this is sort of how collaboration happens through this sort of remixing dynamic on the site.
On the Raspberry Pi presentation we had a couple of months ago.
Oh, you use a Scratch.
There was a kid, 8-year-old kids using remote control cars with Scratch.
And Raspberry Pi has a nice connection to Scratch, so you can control your Raspberry Pi through Scratch. And I totally recommend you do it. If you have kids, you should check out Scratch. If you don't have kids, you should still check out Scratch. It's awesome. I mean, if I want to make like a simple animation, like something like a Flash animation, I'll do it here because it's easier to do it here than it is to do it in any other system I know. So the median number of Scratch remixes that Scratch projects have, though, despite the fact that the platform is designed for remixing and everything about it screams remix me, the vast majority of projects are never remixed. Only 10% of Scratch projects are remixed even once. And again, the scale is like kind of off the hook here, but you see this same sort of power law distribution, right? This is like a law of nature. The majority, and often the vast majority of free software and free culture projects, and remixing projects as well, fail to sort of attract attract even a second person. So in this one, what I've done is I've taken all the data from the Scratch website, but I've also taken a whole bunch of projects from, I've taken all that sort of, essentially the SQL data from the MySQL database running the Scratch online community, but also done a bunch of processing of each of those programs which are shared there to sort of extract the code. The big thing that I'm looking for here is a measure of distance between projects, because I'm actually interested in, I compare every Scratch project to Remix to its sort of antecedent or the original project, and I sort of count the number of blocks which would need to be changed in order to turn the Remix back into the original, right? And I get a measure of how different those things are. I don't know why this is blue, but you will enjoy it. All right, I lied. There's another academic slide here. I just tossed this in here because I wanted to do it. But basically, I find support for. I have sort of 3 theories. I'm interested in testing these theories. Which projects are more likely to be remixed? I have this idea that comes from this idea, like release early, release often. If you release your stuff early, that's better. But of course, if you release it so early that there's nothing there, then we're back to this world of the SourceForge project with nothing there to contribute to, and people are unlikely to work. So I have this theory that we're going to see a relationship like this. That projects that are too simple or too complex will be less likely to attract contributor remixers, right? And using data from Scratch, because we can look inside projects, we can count the number of blocks, the amount of code. They're all comparable to each other. It's really, really cool data. You can see I'm a data person. We see somewhat tentative support, but we see support for this sort of inverse U-shape. The short version is we see much more support among remixes than among de novo projects, which means that remixed remixes see a very strong U-shape, but the de novo projects, like just normal like projects that they're not remixed themselves, see a relationship more like that. But we see this, we see that there. And actually, it's really cool. In addition to just the amount of code, I also know every time everyone presses save. So I actually know how long people have been working on their projects as well. We see the same relationship. People are not just writing more concise code here. If you work too much on your project, people are less likely to want to build on it. There's a whole bunch of theories that sort of remixing, it acts as sort of cultural conversation. I want to work on your project because you're kind of famous and you've done some great stuff, and so maybe I want to contribute to yours because it's maybe good for me. We see the theory here is that the more prominent creator of a project is the more generative it will be. Generative in this case means like remixable or like fecund, likely to produce more, right? And again, we see strong support. For that. The third idea is this idea of cumulativeness, right? Which is that in pure production things add on each other, right? So that if a lot of people are working on something, we create this space that encourages a project which encourages lots of people to improve it as well, because it's getting better, it's getting more interesting, through this sort of accumulation we're ending up with something better. We see strong support for this as well. So we see that projects are more remixed, they're more generative, pure production, they're more successful at mobilizing contributors if we see more complexity, prominence, or cumulativeness. And this gets back to that measure of edit distance. Remember, we also have a measure of how different these projects are. And what we find is basically a big trade-off here, and it's a little bit of a depressing big trade-off, which is that all three of these concepts or variables which are associated with increased generativeness, increased sort of collaboration, are also associated with decreased originality in the work, which means that all of the things which are associated with more remixing in this sort of pure production space are also associated with cheaper, easier remixing. Projects which are more derivative, more just simple little things. That the things you can do to it, which kind of makes sense on one level, the things you might do to attract more people to come in and work on your project are likely to attract the people who are not going to do very much, right? And the more you do them and the more people you can attract, the less those people are doing. That there's this sort of big trade-off, and we call this sort of the remixing dilemma. That from the perspective of someone who wants to go out and change this stuff, there's a bit of a dilemma. We find, again, kind of mixed support for this idea of complexity. So if there's any space that we might want to, if there's any sort of lesson here, the idea would be that more complicated projects are probably, that making your stuff, like working on your stuff more and for longer before you release it, is probably the safest thing that you can do here. If your goal is to increase cumulativeness while also attracting good contributors. And it's interesting, I've talked to, since I've been working on this kind of work, I've talked to lots of people in the free software community. So I talked to Mats, the creator of Ruby. And I was like, tell me, like, had you released other programming languages before? And he's like, oh yes, many. I'm like, what's your theory of like what made Ruby succeed? And he's like, I worked on it for a long time until I released it. Yeah, he's like, yes, but not too long. Because he wanted to release it in a way that was very complete, but which people could still find bugs, people could still find missing things that they wanted to add. And that's what he credits the success of that project. So anyway, those are the basic ideas. The projects are more likely to be remixed when they are complicated, created by high stats creators and cumulative, but there's this big trade-off because each of these factors